Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with GAE. I am Lisa Morgan, a kindergarten teacher and president of the Georgia Association of Educators.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sharon Doe. I'm a physics teacher in Augusta, Georgia, and I'm the current vice president for the Georgia Association of Educators.
Good evening. I'm an English language arts teacher in Houston County. My name is Carly Shaw, and I am the Secretary Treasurer of Georgia Association of Educators.
And I'm Joe Fleming. I represent GAE at the state capitol, and glad to be with you tonight.
And we have our special guest this evening, Dr. Stephen Owens from the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. Welcome, Dr. Owens, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
So this evening we are focusing on education funding in Georgia. And if you all have had a chance to look at, you may not have, because we literally hit send very few minutes ago. Your legislative alert, your legislative update talks about the Senate Committee on Education Funding Mechanisms. And that is a special committee that is meeting this Friday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the state capitol, when all of you are where? In your classroom, on your buses, in your cafeteria. And then it is going to be meeting, the committee will meet again in September and October. Both of those meetings once again on a Friday afternoon from 2 to 4. So we want to give you the information about education funding, and then a little later on we're going to give you a link where we want you to go and provide your input so that we can make sure these senators hear from educators concerning what we need for our classrooms, our buses, our cafeteria. So Dr. Owens, I know you have a little background on the education funding in Georgia. If you want to please share that with us and help us understand how this all works.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, y'all, for having me on. I really appreciate it. I was telling these folks right at the beginning that the groups like GPBI, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and advocacy organization. We are singing back up to y'all's excellent work in the classroom with these students. And I just want to start, I would not be happy with myself if I didn't start by thanking you for the work that you're doing for Georgia's children. I am a senior education policy analyst at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, and my specialty is K-12 education, and we focus on the budget here at GPBI. I've got a short, I hope short presentation for y'all to kind of walk you through the state budget, where it stands now, and then kind of what changes could be made to tweak and fix the Quality Basic Education Act, which dictates $10.7 billion in state funds for our public schools. Here we go. All right, are y'all able to see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So as I mentioned, the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, it's something that it reminds me of when I grew up going to church and my pastor said, if you want to see what somebody worships, look at their budget. And that's what GPBI does. We look at the budget to see who is being prioritized, who is being held back. And while we are very clear that we want the numbers to be perfect, we also have a goal in mind, which is we have a vision for the state of Georgia where all people prosper, and we strive to be an anti-racist organization in that. And so to understand the budget, first we have to understand the revenue, what's coming in, where it's going. As you look at how the state spends funds, almost 3/4 of every dollar the state gets in is going either to education or healthcare. This is not rare nationwide. After Reconstruction, the federal government told southern states, you have to go back and draw up a new constitution, and it needs to include universal public education. And as far as we know, the father of public education, Tunis Campbell, a Black legislator from McIntosh County, is the reason that we have a constitutional responsibility for public schools, which is something that your leaders and that I regularly appeal to when we're talking to lawmakers, so that we do right by Georgia students to provide an adequate public education. So you can see this is where your state budget is for the fiscal year that we're in right now. We are in fiscal year 23, and we will be until the end of June. As you look at that pie chart, it doesn't really tell you kind of like how things look year to year. This is probably the best example we can give of what the state's finances look like, just kind of compared to last year. The state has what's called a revenue shortfall reserve, which is essentially like our savings account. There's a certain amount that is required to be put in here so that if the state has a bad year, we can draw down from these savings. You can see just how many billions of dollars were put into the revenue shortfall reserve. But for 2021, that jumped up. We have, I'm not kidding, billions of dollars in a surplus. And there are several reasons why that is. Some of it is going to be able to be, saved, and it's going to go into this revenue shortfall reserve. But the General Assembly is going to be required to spend billions of additional dollars this year. And there's, again, several reasons, but there's two main ones I would like to talk about. The first, the CARES 1 and 2 Act, which is meant for supporting schools and states during the pandemic, as well as the American Rescue Plan. The first was under President Trump. The next was under President Biden. These are billions of dollars that have come down to the state, come down to local schools, and some have been stimulus payments that have come down directly to us. And a lot of this is being taxed. So the state is getting some benefit from a lot of this federal money that's coming down. So that's one reason that the state has a lot of federal money, and schools have a lot of federal money with which to support students as they recover from the pandemic. So that's one. The second is that the governor's tenure the past few years has been very conservative, because every year starts with saying, like, how much do we think we're going to make? And then once you have that number, any dollar over that looks like a surplus. And Governor Kemp's team and his office have been very conservative, saying how much is going to be made for the past few years. And we've consistently hit above that. You could make the case that that's really good to have really conservative estimates. But conservative estimates also means that the state just has less funding to work with year to year. If we keep having these kind of surplus dollars, that's less money going to teachers, to public health, to DFACS workers, all these things that we as citizens rely upon. The combination of those two things means we have billions of dollars in reserves. Now, there have been actions by this administration, the governor's administration, which have used a lot of this money, definitely not all of it. You've probably seen these kind of like one-time tax rebates that have gone out to folks. You've probably heard about Governor Kemp wanting to do another round of those, just about in a few $100s per tax filer, some money relief for property tax collections. This eats away at that surplus, but does provide this kind of temporary relief. GPBI comes from the perspective of we would rather see kind of long-term solutions to support folks. And that might mean expanding kind of the work of the state government. But there's still a lot of funds there with which our General Assembly is going to have to work with this next year. Now, something that's going to eat away at that, and this is some fine print, so don't feel like you have to read every single you don't lean in close to your computer to see all of this, especially because I'm going to send this to President Morgan, and she can send this out to all of y'all to look at this on your own time if you have any desire to look at budget trends in your own time. The long story short is at the very end of General Assembly last year, lawmakers passed a tax cut that requires certain hurdles to be jumped over. Let's say like certain goals to be met. If the state grows at a certain amount over the next 7 years, this tax cut, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you and I are in middle income households. In 7 years, we will get a tax cut of $193. And the top 1% of Georgians, as far as how much money they make year after year, are going to get an additional $9,500 per year. So this overwhelmingly benefits these top 20%, top 1% of earners. And the total cost of this tax cut, again, there's certain benchmarks that have to be met, but the total cost of these tax cuts, it's going to take a $2 billion cut of the state of Georgia. So not to give you whiplash, but when you look at this chart of where the state's funds are going, easily the biggest slice is education. And we have seen, and your leaders have seen, that anytime we see down years in Georgia, because we haven't kind of bolstered our revenue to be able to endure recessions, anytime we see like less collections or cuts, like if that tax cut is fully implemented, the first and worst cut is to our public schools. And I'm sure a lot of y'all were teaching in that 2010 to 2014 range when we're cutting $1 billion a year from our public schools. That money is never coming back. The state never goes back and says, we know we cut this from you, so let's go ahead and fill that back in. No, once it's gone, it's just terrible for those years. And that is one reason that we continue to kind of lift up tax cuts like these, that yes, it would be super dope to get $193 per year. I think I would actually trade that. I would allow the state to hold on to that so that we could fully fund our public schools, so that we could have a strong safety net, so that we could do right by our roads, our public health, et cetera. So this is something we're going to continue to watch. Lawmakers do not have to, this isn't destiny. Lawmakers could absolutely go back next year and say, this was a mistake. Let's claw this back. But if we continue to hit these benchmarks, the state is going to take a huge hit, and that means public education will take a huge hit. So now let's zero in on the K12 budget. Overall, this year, we're looking at $10.7 billion for the Department of Education. Now, as I'm sure y'all know, your local public schools are not just paid through state funds. On average, the state pays about half of all the money that goes into the public school. Local property taxes pay for about 43%, and the last 7% are federal funds, think special education. That $10.7 billion amount, that's the amount that's coming specifically from the state. And one of the reasons that I and GAE advocate at the state level is because it's the state's responsibility to provide a public education. That is where the responsibility sits in our state constitution. A part of this $10.7 billion budget is a restoration of past budget cuts. So if you think about like when you make a cut to things like public education in the budget, that kind of carries over until the next year as the baseline. The nice thing about the way that Georgia funds schools is that we have a formula called the Quality Basic Education Act, which says like it or not, there's a certain dollar amount that schools need in order to be kind of quote unquote fully funded. And so this has been really helpful to advocates like GPBI and like GAE, where we can go to lawmakers and say, you're still 400 million short. We really appreciated the fact that the General Assembly this year not only made sure that we don't have those dedicated cuts moving forward, but also filled in last year's budget cuts so that it would appear when you look at the budget as if last year they didn't have a budget cut, and then this year we'll have a budget cut. Now, I absolutely am willing to offer praise to lawmakers for filling this in, because that is not easy to do. But I think one thing that's important to remember here is that that is the bare minimum that's required in order to say that we're even providing a basic education. That's literally the title of the law, is a quality basic education. So anytime I meet a lawmaker who says, like, can you believe it? Like, we actually filled in, we fully funded public schools. The way I hear it is, it's like, I went a year without cheating on my wife. Like, that's great. But, like, maybe we should have higher aspirations than just not taking money away from public schools. So I will get off my soapbox on that. Included in this budget is, I'm sure you've heard, $287 million for a $2,000 teacher pay raise. Now, one thing that's unique about the way that Georgia funds schools is just because you hand this money to districts doesn't mean that everyone is going to evenly distribute those raises to all teachers. We have a survey that we sent out to local school districts, found some are going to give a $4,000 teacher pay raise to y'all. Some are going to give a $1,000 raise. Because when you look at the amount of funding that schools have, they continue to have several needs that they have to take care of. And the state only pays for about, again, half of all the teachers in the school. So if you say we're going to give everyone a $2,000 teacher raise, that's great for about half the teachers, but then local funds have to carry the other half. Federal funds have to carry some of that too. So it makes sense as I look at the budget that some districts just cannot afford to pass this raise down to teachers because of the uniquely American way we fund schools, that we rely on local property taxes as a not small portion of our budget. Now, moving on from there, these are two grants which are a little wonky, a little hard to understand, and I hope to kind of walk you through them in the next few slides. But taken together, these two grants show that property taxes are increasing, and they might be increasing more in low wealth school districts. So that's the good news, is that if you look at this on its face, it looks like things are getting just a little bit more progressive in the state of Georgia. But when we get to talking about equalization, I believe in the next slide, I will kind of make the case that it might not be as hunky-dory as these have you look. And then the last two grants I'll talk about, student enrollment growth and the amount of funding for your experience and your certifications. That's kind of like calculated separately, that y'all know that as teachers stay in the classroom longer, they're guaranteed a raise on the state salary schedule, and same for getting a master's or a doctorate. And then about $5 million for Pupil Transportation for 5.4% raises. And I hope to make the case that we can't ignore school bus funding moving forward. So, equalization. This is a grant specifically meant for low wealth school districts. I grew up in Clayton County, where properties are much cheaper than their neighbor in Fayette County, right? And because part of the school budget is based on local property taxes, for generations, states would just say like, oh, that's too bad. Clayton County gets less money than Fayette County. But Georgia has this great grant called the Equalization Grant that says like, okay, Clayton County, the Clayton Counties of this world, the Jeff Davises and Seminoles and Quitmans of this world can't raise as much as the Fayettes and Forsyths and Cobbs of this world. So they built in this grant specifically for those lower wealth school districts. And this is the first time I've seen that grant go down since the Great Recession. The Great Recession, it went down not because of the formula, but because the lawmakers capped it and said, we can't afford this. And then they changed the formula. But so as you look at this, it could show like, okay, maybe this means that lower wealth school districts are starting to raise, their property taxes are being raised. Maybe they're catching up to this higher wealth school district, so the state doesn't have to put this much money into it. But I will tell you about a meeting I had with a lawmaker recently who said that he is worried that this is not because of property taxes. This is because of tax breaks the state is giving to major corporations. And so just really quickly, if you have a, let's say a large industry in your school district, and the state gave tax breaks to that industry to build a plant in your district. Sometimes that might include not paying property taxes for a while. But because the state calculates equalization on how much properties are worth in your district, it could look like you have $2 billion of additional property, but you're not getting any of that additional tax money. So long story short, the state's going to treat you like you are a lot wealthier per child, but your district might not be seeing a dime from that for a while because of the breaks that have been given from the state to kind of lure that industry there. And so that's something that we're going to continue to watch to make sure that our districts aren't on the hook to kind of pay for this rural development that the state prioritizes by luring these industries to Georgia. So we'll continue to watch equalization because that's a lifeline to our low wealth school districts. Another line item that I'm going to watch, and I know a lot of public education advocates are going to watch, is this is the amount of money that's going to private schools through vouchers every year since 2008. If you've never been in the meeting with a lawmaker, especially a lawmaker who's annoyed, then you might not have heard a line that like really bothers me, which is like public schools keep coming and asking for more and more money, and it doesn't make a difference. Let me tell you about a group of folks who keep asking for more and more money. This is private school vouchers. Public funds go into private schools, and we have no idea what that money is going to. For one of the vouchers, we're not even sure what schools it's going to. We don't know if those schools have teachers with bachelor's degree. They are not required to do background checks on their teachers or parapros or other adults in the building. We don't know if they're kicking kids out because they're gay or because they have gay parents. Let me be clear. We do know that they're kicking kids out because they're gay, because we could see this in student handbooks that are handed out. But there's so little state accountability to this. And a couple years ago, the state auditor wrote a report saying, we're looking at all this money going to vouchers, and we have so little accountability to it. The state needs to kind of like find out where this money is going. Are parents being well served when they send their kids to private schools on the state's dime? And the state passed a law at the very last second of General Assembly this year, giving another $20 million a year to this. This chart is the answer to my question whenever a lawmaker says, how are we going to pay for that? Like, how are we paying for $155 million a year going to private schools through vouchers when we don't have any idea how kids are doing there? We don't know if kids with disabilities are being taken care of there. A lot of protections have been fought for in the public schools that are not available in private schools, which is one of the reasons GPBI has a long-standing opposition to private school vouchers. This represents over $1 billion given to private schools since 2008. And the only reward lawmakers will get is that next year folks are going to ask for more. So what changes can we make besides clawing back and getting some sort of return on investment for what's going in those private school vouchers? What changes could be made to the Quality Basic Education Act, which is that law which dictates state education funding, so that we can do right by Georgia's public school students? Because it can be easy to kind of like see the amount of money that comes in and think like this must just be normal and not really understand, like, is this how much folks in South Carolina, Kentucky, Massachusetts are getting? And so I wrote a blog a few weeks ago that kind of makes the case for three fixes, which is really low-hanging fruit. And it's three fixes specifically because we have this Senate Education Study Committee that was mentioned before. The first and the most obvious blind spot that we have in the Quality Basic Education Act is that Georgia is one of only 6 states that does not provide any additional funding to educate students living in poverty. What does that look like? If you look at Georgia's performance on standardized tests, I know that a lot of us in the education realm are we're given to nihilism and doom. And I completely understand that. We're taking hits across the board. when you compare Georgia to other states, Georgia is about middle of the pack when it comes to how we're doing in our standardized tests. There are so few states that are doing like significantly better than Georgia. When you like truly compare us to other states, the one big difference is that the difference between how kids on free and reduced lunch, so our low income kids, and their wealthy neighbors do, that difference that some people call like a test gap is the second largest in the nation. Now, I come from a world where if you want something, you got to pay for it. So if we want to do right by low income kids in our schools, then we need to give schools the money to actually serve them. And the fact that we're one of only 6 states, this is easily the biggest need that I can see in our Quality Basic Education Act. This is how, if we could create like a weight in our funding formula to educate these students and provide districts guidance on how to use this money well, I think that this would bring us to a world-class education system, because those are the kids that when their scores start coming up, we're going to see Georgia's scores just kind of out of this world improve, not just in the Southeast, but kind of nationwide, if we can show that we know how to take care of our low-income kids in the classroom. Another thing I would want to mention, and GPBI continues to advocate for more money for student transportation or pupil transportation, because it's something we keep hearing from school folks. These dark blue bars represent how much local funding is going to school bus transportation. That's to get new buses, that's to pay drivers, that's to pay drivers' health insurance, monitors, that's for different buses for students with disabilities, right? Look at how that's growing since the year 2000. The gold bar is how much money is coming from the state. So over this time, from 2000 to 2021, we gained 250,000 students, but the state funding didn't change at all. Buses cost more, gas costs more, labor costs more. We should be paying our bus drivers and monitors more in 2021 and 2022 than we did in 2020. That's just what inflation is. And we had 2 down years in 2020 and 2021 because we had some districts that weren't providing transportation to those districts because the schools might have been closed. I don't think it's crazy to imagine we're going to see a huge jump when all is said and done in 2022 because of the cost of gas, because of the cost of buses, and because we're seeing a lot of school bus drivers with CDLs leaving to make, I'm not kidding, 3, 4, 5 times as much driving for other industries in the trucking industry. So the state needs to get back to where we were in the 90s. Back in the 90s, the state paid half of all the transportation costs across the state to bus kids to and from school. Now we're closer to 15%. That's how much the state is paying. And so what happens if local districts have got to pick up the slack? That is money taken out of the classroom. You're looking at hundreds of $1 millions taken out of the classroom. That means higher class sizes. That's less art and music. Like districts have a responsibility by law to provide transportation. They do not have a law requirement to have class sizes go from 20 to 25, right? So you got to find that money somewhere. And because you need the buses to start every day, that means you're pulling money from the classroom. And so we have got to reinvest in pupil transportation, and then that'll allow districts to use the money that was going to that in other parts of the school. The last area I'll talk about is the student to counselor ratio. And I think this has been something that has gotten a lot of time in the sun, justifiably, because people are understanding that our students are experiencing a mental health crisis. That we have a group of students that is spending more time online, more time isolated at home than we've ever seen. And the end result is that kids are struggling. The state pays for 1 school counselor for every 450 kids. You can see from this report that I pulled that because some districts are using local money, it's a little bit lower than that. We have about one school counselor for every 419 kids. If we have any school counselors on the call, I'm sure you can attest to the fact that 419 is quite the caseload. It is, it's more students per counselor than our neighbors Alabama or South Carolina have. The American School Counselors Association, which is the trade organization which really understands the research and has done a really good job of being kind of that gold standard of what it looks like to serve kids, they recommend that we should have a ratio of 1 to 250. So I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that our lawmakers need to start seriously investing in the mental health of children by providing schools the money to do right by their kids who are struggling in this area. And I know that school counselors do more than support kids in their mental health, but I think that we can all agree that that is a strong argument for providing a lot of funding to this area. Those are just those 3 areas that like are so easy to spot. Even you don't have to be an education finance expert to see that we need to provide funding to educate students living in poverty. We need to do right by student transportations, by our bus drivers, monitors, by our school buses, which are keeping kids safe. And then finally, we need to seriously invest in the mental health of children by investing in more school counselor funding. And that is all I've got. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Thank you so much. I've been sitting here taking notes. I learned something new every time. But the first question I have, I want to talk about equalization for a moment. This is a question I have because I've heard throughout the years that you said they redid the equalization formula. And let me see if I understand what's going on with equalization. Equalization grants are given to districts who are below the 75th percentile in property tax.
It used to be 75th percentile. After the Great Recession, they lowered it to the 50th. So now it's just the bottom half.
So it's just the bottom half. So, and we're only bringing those below the 50th percentile, the funding to the 50th percentile.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So, do they reevaluate every year which districts are getting the equalization?
They do. Yeah. Every year they look at the property tax digest and see like kind of, so some districts will not get it 1 year and then get those ones just like kind of right on the line. Yeah. That's a every year evaluation.
Okay. So the district may, if they're the 49th percentile this year, they get the equalization and they have that fund to help their kids. And then next year they may sneak up to 50. And even though they don't get those tax dollars because we've given some big company a tax break, they're no longer getting the funding for their students. And
absolutely, they're not only not getting the funding, the equalization funding,
right,
but also that local 5 mil share, which I didn't really explain. And also, the state takes more from the amount they give to them in 2 areas, in equalization and that. They can get double hit, and then they don't get any of those property taxes.
Okay. So I'm understanding a little bit better. I hope some other people are. I know this is something that through the years, my years attending school board meetings, it's really been misunderstood by the public about what districts are getting equalization. So that is, thank you for that. I think Sharon had a question about something else. Sharon?
My question was along those lines as well. The Education Reform Commission in 2015 recommended that there be some kind of weight added to the funding. Why was that not put in place?
That's a great question. So few people want to touch Quality Basic Education Act. I think you really need to decide. I think it really either needs to be the governor or the Speaker of the House, ideally the governor, who says like, all right, I'm going to stake my reputation on this. But we've had more than one governor try and then nothing come of it. I'm not sure. From my understanding, that was something that Governor Deal said, all right, he told that committee that he was going to make a move on it and then just nothing came of it. And so I can't speak to why he backed away from it, or if it even made sense politically. But what I love about that is that's a Republican Education Reform Commission. You know, this is something that both sides of the aisle see we need this. And the fact that 45 other states have done it means that, like, a lot of people of all stripes see that we are way past due a type of funding like that.
And my second question is, what are the differences between funding charter schools and funding regular public schools?
So if the charter school is authorized by the district, then it sits very similar to the way that traditional public schools are set. There has to be a strong relationship, in my understanding. The best it can happen is if there's a strong relationship between the district and that charter school. But charter schools that are authorized by the state have their own line item, and that's the State Charter Schools Commission. And that is completely set apart from the Quality-Based Education Act. And to be completely frank, something I have avoided learning for years. I can barely hold Quality-Based Education Act in my brain, but yeah, the State Charter Schools Commission is given a separate line item, and then they divvy it out amongst those state charter schools. And for those of y'all who remember kind of like those charter school battles in the early 2000s and 2010s, this might be a charter school that went to their district and said, we would like to be a charter school. And then the district says, for good or bad reasons, like, no, we don't trust that. And then they go to the state, and then the state might say, okay, we do think that's a good reason. So like it's this authorizer that kind of goes around the district. And now you're responsible to the state. And that's had quite the checkered history, is the way I'll put it.
One thing I want to say to our members watching, we don't expect you to be an expert on this funding. None of us do. I think Dr. Owens is the closest thing to an expert that you're hearing right now. We are all continuing to learn about how this works, but it is very important that this special committee on education funding hear from educators. As we said at the beginning, their first meeting is Friday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So we know where every one of you is going to be in your classroom, on your bus. So we have a link. I'm going to put it in the comments in just a moment, to a job form with some questions that we want our members to complete this short. We kind of did it in a survey format. What information do you want our legislators to hear about what you need for your students? What do your students need? What things do you need? One of the things I think about is, you know, every educator, we need planning time that is unencumbered by anything else. Planning time to sit in your classroom and actually plan or grade. And if that is what you see as the most important thing that can be done to make your job better and make things better for your students, then that's what we want to hear. So I'm going to put that link in the comments. I did earlier put the link to our legislative alert that was sent out a little bit earlier, and it is in there as well. But we want as many of our members as possible to please complete this survey and let us know what you see. I'm going to toss it to Sharon and Carly. Is there something that you see that you think everybody needs to be talking about?
I'm racking my brain because there's so many things I can think of that we need. And planning time is crucial. And so often while we're planning or during our planning time, they're being taken away by meetings and things that could have been an email sometimes. It's just really hard to plan for effective instruction and do our data collection, and especially teachers who have students on IEPs or 504s, getting their work done when we don't have designated time that is truly designated for those things. We end up doing a lot of things at home and on our own time, and that's not fair. I mean, we should be able to get our things done during the school day. So planning time truly is a big important piece of the puzzle that would make a difference in our students' ability to be successful.
Sharon, you have something?
Well, going back to the funding, I kind of had another question about the funding. And with the equalization grants, some districts tend to use those federal funds to substitute for the state funds, particularly when it comes to educating children who live in poverty. Why is Georgia one of the 8 states that don't have funding set aside specifically for children living in poverty?
I love that question, and I have no idea. I mean, I think when I talk to my colleagues in Alabama, you know, I'll kind of, they'll catch me complaining the fact that we don't have like specific funding to educate students living in poverty, or, you know, we got laws on the books that don't even allow associations to become unions. And then they'll look at Georgia and be like, yeah, but y'all have universal pre-K. Like, I can't put a finger on kind of like the sociology and inertia. I genuinely believe that when Georgia created the Quality Basic Education Act in the 1980s, it set us so far above other states in the South as far as how we fund. And then we had the 90s where Governor Miller, you know, that was his thing, raise teacher pay, $6,000 a year. Like, that was his thing. And the end result is, by the time, you know, I'm in high school in 1998, Georgia is just lapping other states in the South, which we always compare ourselves to. And I think that allowed a lot of lawmakers to just kind of not think about kind of like, what are the gaps in this area? And maybe schools, because we had plenty of funding for, let's say, teacher pay, because in the 90s, the average teacher, there was not what they call that like teacher hit to leave the profession to their contemporaries outside of the classroom were actually making less than them when you considered the amount of experience and the amount of qualifications. That's how well teachers were paid in the 90s in Georgia compared. But I think that also just kind of allowed for nobody to really look at what changes need to be made. And we have spent the last 20 something years picking away at all these areas, and now things that could have hidden in the background are right out in front. So that would be my best guess, is that we ate away at this grant. We allowed teacher pay to languish. We stopped addressing transportation, and the end result is that like there's just so many more needs than the money to support it. So that's my best guess, but I'm sure there's an education historian that would be able to answer it better than me when it comes to just like why we've ignored these specific group of students.
I have one last comment and question. So as a classroom teacher, I know that there are things that are not funded for the classes that I teach because science equipment is very expensive. So when you say that there are surplus funds in the reserve, please explain that. That is not meaning that education is overfunded. I don't think that's what that means. So could you clarify that for me?
Not at all. Yeah, that's the state's piggy bank. You know, I saw Governor Kemp, I think, gave a $125 grant to teachers to buy classroom supplies. That's coming out of that piggy bank, but the checkbook's still sitting at the state. No, we heard that a little bit a couple years ago when like in the very beginning of the pandemic, actually, that just like we heard some lawmakers say, yeah, schools are overfunded. And that was just really hard to hear because we knew schools were struggling, because I would hear from special education teachers that are just like trying to, they're piecing their classes together with duct tape, and teachers who are going out of their own pocket to pay for kids' lunches. Something I know we're going back to now that universal free lunches are expired. No, this is state money. That's where it's sitting right now in the state piggy bank. Schools are very much still trying to do and being required to do more with less.
You just hit something that one of our viewers asked a question in the comments. What would it take to get a universal free lunch for all of our students once again?
All right, I'll give you the easy answer and the hard answer. The easy answer is this is what the federal government's for. They need to do this. They're the ones that dropped the ball, dropped the ball. We had these universal free lunches for 2 years. It was fantastic. The research benefits are overwhelming. It doesn't just help low income kids. It helps middle and upper income kids. Everyone benefits from getting rid of that stigma. I've got libertarian colleagues who are like, look, if we're going to require kids to be in school, we need to be paying for their lunches. It doesn't have to be this partisan issue. And the federal government should be the one paying for it because they've got the funds for it. Georgia could do it. Other states have done it. California, as I understand, Maine, they'll do that kind of like one time to support schools. California now, it's like forever. They're going to have free lunches. By my best reading, we're looking at about $200 million a year. Let me put that in perspective. The state of Georgia has one of the lowest tobacco taxes in the nation. When you see how much money we're spending in public health because folks have lung cancer, because folks are struggling with the consequences of smoking, it's almost like we are paying smokers. A lot of state funds are going to help people who are struggling with the consequences of smoking. We have the third lowest tobacco tax in the nation. If we raise that to the national average, we would make $600 million a year. So that's just to put that in context that, like, yes, $200 million is a big number. It's more than I make in a year. There are a lot of options our lawmakers could do to make that just kind of pennies on the dollar. And the results in our schools, as y'all have seen, are just incredible. It is just incredible to take away that stigma, to take away that required paperwork. And so, yeah, that's absolutely something that you can write about. There are no bad answers because y'all have the lived experiences. Y'all are seeing this day to day.
Okay. I have not been doing my commercial, so I'm going to take just a break because we've got several things coming up in GAE that I really want to make sure that our people watching know about. First, it's already in there. The link is in the comments where we want you to put your comments about this education funding issue. Next, tomorrow evening, there is a campaigns and elections Zoom that I am going to put the registration link in for. This is a get out the vote informational meeting for our members who are interested in joining our team that will be working throughout the election to get out the vote and ensure that all of our members are voting. There are some stipends available for those of you who might want to join these teams, and that informational meeting is tomorrow. The next thing I want to let you know about, we are having a virtual town hall with our endorsed candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams, and it is next Wednesday. We don't have Facebook Live next week. It is next Wednesday from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. and we want as many of our members to register as possible for this event. And then I have one more thing that this may be news to Carly and Sharon. We talked last week about the incentives if members recruit new members this year. And y'all remember it was a $250 prize for a member that recruits somebody, and it's a $250 prize for a new member, and it's a it's a $500 prize for somebody that recruits 10 new members. So somebody asked me, say, hey, Lisa, what about those of us that have been members for a long time? Well, we need a cash prize. So we now have a cash prize for those of you who have anyone who is a member. And all you have to do is go to gae.org/update and enter your information so we can update your membership file. We want a good email address for you that is not a school email address. We want your cell phone number so we can send you a text. I literally called a member a little bit earlier this evening, and I got that disconnected signal. Yeah, and that only happens on a landline. So we really want our members to go give us your updated information. And in December, when we give away the money for the new member and the recruiters, we will be giving away a cash prize to one of our members who goes on and updates their information. So there's all my commercials all in one long set, and I've put all those links in the comments. So we really want everybody to please click on those links, register. If you're interested in the campaigns and elections tomorrow, we know everyone wants to be there and hear from educators and our endorsed candidate for governor next Wednesday. And we want you to update your information. And I'm done with the commercials. Joe, I know you had a question earlier. What were you wanting to talk about?
I'm so grateful for Stephen being with us. I think we could have him on every Wednesday for the next 10 years and still learn something new. But not because of your presentation, Stephen. I was already dark about the future. With all the money that the state's giving away, billions and billions of dollars in income tax refunds and property tax break, that's great. I love it. However, I'm really concerned. I'm really deeply concerned about education funding in the future. Your own work and GBPI's work, I think, shows that QBE has only been fully funded 3 times in the last 20 years or so. And when this federal money dries up, and that will be soon, and if we hit leaner times, there's going to be a difficult fight over budget priorities at the state capitol. And unfortunately, the history shows us, as you said earlier, where is it easiest to cut? It's public education. And we should be investing now in the future, taking those dollars and investing in those kind of infrastructures. I was thinking earlier when you were talking about the 20-year gap when we basically neglected public education, it's like a homeowner in a house. If you don't do any repairs for 20 years, you can't sit there in 20 years and wonder why things are broken and need to be fixed. So we've got our work cut out for us at the state capitol. The other thing I was thinking while Stephen was talking was just even this session, there's a misconception among legislators that we're flush with cash. When we debate the voucher issue with legislators, I remember one legislator, well, did you know that public schools have more in their rainy day funds in the state of Georgia? What? That's not even germane to the argument. And then there's this idea that because of the federal dollars, we're set for life, and we're not. And those dollars are actually, in fact, tied to COVID. So those monies go away soon. The state's not going to be able to afford to give many more tax breaks or tax cuts. But if they do continue on this path, I'm really worried about public education getting funded and other high priority needs. More of a soapbox than a question, I guess.
It hamstrings us. It hamstrings us now, and then it hamstrings us for the future too. When we continue to lower that income tax rate, we get like a tiny benefit. At least those of us in the middle, 20%, our low income neighbors get even less.
I think it's $250 for a single filer based on the legislation this past year. I could be wrong, but I mean, for an individual, it doesn't, it's just the aggregate expenditure of that money, I think, would be a much more impactful and positive influence on the state going forward.
Absolutely. And I understand that a bunch of folks are distrustful of the government getting money, but I think that you and y'all's members can help kind of change the tide on that. This isn't like some invisible government workers. These are teachers. These are bus drivers. These are neighbors. And I'm always encouraged, especially when I talk to rural folks, they see it just so clearly. Like we talk about economic development. Economic development is more money for school buses and school bus drivers. That's money going to every community in the state of Georgia. Same with more money for teachers, same with more money for facilities. That is direct economic development money going right into pockets. And the only thing I was say to interrupt the kind of like, as we think about the doom of like losing out on this money, is that one example the state always has had, and it does not get as much time in the sun as as others, is the fact that TRS is such a good example of when the state continues to invest in something, the benefits can be fantastic. The state of Georgia has never missed a payment on TRS since the 1940s. That's Democrats and Republican legislators. They've had a lot of chances to complain, and I know they have. Lawmakers have on both sides about how much money's going into TRS. The end of the day, though, TRS continues to be one of the most generous pensions in the nation, and it's one of the best funded in the nation because of strong leadership from a state that continues to pay the bills on time. Let's treat all of public schools like we've been treating like TRS. And so that is one area where I see, no, it's possible. You can have liberal and conservative governments still look at an area that costs a lot of money and say, but this is what we got to do. This is something we got to do. And you can invest in communities that way. And so I think that's a little bit of a silver lining in an area where we continue to see strong investment. And the end result is that we're taking care of our retirees in a way that the Floridas, South Carolinas, Tennessees, Alabamas, and many other states across the nation are incredibly jealous of.
Dr. Owens, one of our members who's watching commented, and I'm going to talk about this. The comment was, we need more money for PSCRS. And
yes,
we do. And we want you to keep watching us and keep watching your legislative alerts. The Senate Retirement Committee made a commitment to GAE that they would be holding hearings about PSCRS. And Joe, I know, has been reaching out. We are holding them accountable, and we are holding them to that commitment. And when they do, we will be reaching out to our members about that issue. And I would say to those members who are in PSCRS, and we all know it needs more funding, that's one of the things that go to that link I put in there about this Senate funding committee. They need to hear that as well. And it is, oh, I know what it was, Dr. Technology. That's something that we've all been thinking about through the pandemic, is technology and the need for our students to have a device and to have access, which we know access is a broader community problem in our rural areas. But is technology included in QBE? Because we're talking about a 1980s formula.
No, there's no dedicated funding in QBE for technology. And so like districts throughout the years have kind of like figured it out. But again, figure it out means pulling from another area that is funded. that means like that means your gifted programs or your ESOL or you know what I mean, like other areas that you're gaining funding. you got to figure it out. And that means you have to have Wi-Fi, and it means you're pulling from someplace else, or, or for those select few districts that have a ton of local property taxes, but that's not the majority of us.
Right.
The vast majority of us are in districts where it's going to have to come from somewhere else. And anytime I hear a district say it's got to come from somewhere else, that's the classroom.
Yeah.
Because 2/3 to 90% of all the money going into the school is going directly into salaries in the classroom. So that's the somewhere else that they have to find it from.
Okay, so thank you very much. And I think we are at our hour time. So thank you once again, Dr. Owens, for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's watching us. You all have a great evening. And our next Facebook Live, let me look at my calendar real quick, will be September 7th. So next Wednesday, we want you to join us for our teletown hall with our endorsed candidate, Stacey Abrams. And then we will be back with Facebook Live on September 7th. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks.